Hi, this is Profi Plays, and I'm Profi. I decided, given that there was actually a reasonable amount of interest in my previous video about D&D with kids and the update with that. So previously I talked about kind of how things started, uh, my my older boys, my 12-year-old, my 10-year-old, the characters they created, that kind of thing, and where I started them out, some of the early stuff that they did. Right, so I want to pick up and kind of finish telling the story of what they did in the village where they started, the village of Willowell. Right. And I also want to share some of the tools that I use, right, when putting this together, because I'm a fairly lazy DM, right? So I try to use, I like randomized stuff, right? So I try to use randomized stuff whenever I can, right? So I'll share some of those tools that I use with you. Right. So before I talked about how there's undead stuff happening, right, one thing that I realized is that if I'm dealing with the undead, then clerics are useful. And I have a sorcerer and a wizard in my party. So, okay, maybe let's try mixing things up a bit. Let them experience some different types of creatures. Also, by this point, they had leveled up to level 2, right? So that they weren't quite as squishy as as a wizard and a sorcerer start, though they were still pretty squishy, and that will come up. Right, so I decided then to mix things up a bit when we got to about session 5 or so, and introduce them to a new idea. Right. So what I had, how I set this up was that I introduced them to a retired adventurer, a rogue by the name of Shadowvale. I have to check my notes because this was so long ago. Right. Right. So this person, and it's like the classic, right, meeting Strider in a tavern kind of scene. Right. It's in the tavern, this guy beckons them over. It says, "Hey, I have this map, right, of this vault that I think has treasure in it. There's this specific stuff that I want. And you can keep the rest." Right, was the idea. Okay, right. So I needed to create this vault. Right, when so again, I'm lazy. So what I did, I went to there's a great tool. Don John is the name of the site, and I will share this in the description for the video. A link to this. It's all kinds of great stuff for producing things for RPGs, and can do this stuff automatically. So I have here kind of the printout. You can see what it looks like. You can create random dungeons. It will give you a name. Right? You can even specify kind of what's the theming of the dungeon, what kinds of creatures do you want to appear, what level is it for, that kind of thing. And it gives you things like here's the general history, and it then goes and gives you room by room explanations of kind of what do the doors look like, what are they going to find in that room, what kind of wandering monsters might they run into throughout the dungeon, that kind of thing. So this is pretty awesome, right? So I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I will create this, and then you can also, one of the great things is that if you think ahead enough, the problem is that if you move away from the website, then you'll lose it, right? So you need to make sure you save everything as soon as it's generated, right? But they even create here like the player map of it. So I could just kind of hand my kids this and say, here, this is what you're handed, and this X here, like that is where we think the treasure vault is here. So you have to find a way, right, from the entrance, right, to make your way up here, right? We're not entirely sure what you're going to encounter. Right, so then you can have like a nice player map where like one thing that this does, okay, we have this room here that we think exists. We have no idea how to get into it, right? So there must be a secret passage somewhere. There might also be other secret passages. Those are not labeled. And so that's kind of a cool thing. Like here, that there has to be some way, right, to move into this area down here. Is it here? Is it from this room? Really don't know, right? So I kind of like that, and the secret stuff is still secret here. Uh, at the same time, I guess it is revealing the existence of rooms, just uncertainty about how to get there. But anyway, I thought this was kind of a nice tool, so I've used this several times actually with them. Okay. And there's all kinds of options, like how big you want the map to be, this kind of thing. So anyway, so I did this, and this one was populated with goblins, orcs, bugbears, that type of thing. So they go in, right, and they have some encounters as they go. Right. And one thing that they learned is that when they meet a bugbear, they need to just run because I didn't. Yeah, I did the math. yeah, math doesn't always work out the way you hope. We found out that, oh, it should be a balanced encounter. If I have one bugbear and the two of them, they should be able to like, defeat them. Not what happened, right? So they end up having to like run from a bugbear that they run into as they realize they're definitely not going to win this one, right? And then my favorite part of this was that they get to another room where there are a couple orcs. 'Cause from what math I did, two orcs, two of them should be roughly balanced, right? And my 10-year-old, he loves to befriend everybody in these games, right? So he decides, I want to try to befriend these orcs. And he rolls incredibly. So I'm like, okay, you convinced them. They're at least going to let you pass. They're like they are well disposed enough to you that you can pass. So they do actually manage, right, to succeed getting through the dread vaults of chaos, as the name was that the Donjon website gave me. They get the treasure, they return it, and then they head off. Uh, uh, having made these orc friends. So how things evolve from here. So I at this point I had kind of decided that I wanted right that the evil cult to start playing more of a role, right? So I developed this cult more, and then in the next session I had them start by the high priest in the Order of Light that happens to have like a temple in this village. Right, is found dead on the altar with like a dagger sticking out of him. It's like to the Lords of the Dark or something like that. Right, so we have now a murder mystery. Right, so okay, right, so they're going to find where this cult is located, and they're going to have to deal with it somehow. Well, that's not necessarily the way things worked out. Right, so they go to try to deal with this issue after they do a little bit of investigation, right? And I have them like out in the wilderness as they've learned that there's going to be somewhere around here. So they start heading toward where they think the cult is going to be located, right? And then they start bickering with each other because my like any kids, they don't always get along, right? So, so they start like this inter-party conflict where it's going to start they're going to have to roll initiative for fighting each other. I'm not having this. So zombies, easy solution, right? So zombies show up, right? Now they have somebody else that they can fight, right? So they fight off the zombies, and then immediately, right after the zombies are taken care of, cultists show up, right, to come take. And at this point, they're pretty worn down, right? So the cult manages, right, to capture them and drags them in. Of course, my 10-year-old, right, Balasar, the sorcerer, and also the prince in exile, or at least not in connection with his father, the not quite as murdered as we thought king. If you want to know more about that, watch the first video in the series. So, so, so the cult captures them, and Balasar decides, "Oh, I'm going to try to make friends, right, with these cultists." And he named him Sherman or something like that. So, hey, Sherman, and like is talking to him, and Sherman is not particularly interested in being his friend, and they escort them right to the temple, right, where it eventually becomes clear that the plan of the evil cult is to sacrifice right these two people very much as they did right this high priest as well, right? So fight starts, but at this point, um, my sons are outrageously outnumbered, right? Because I mean, the whole cult is here, so they have like I think it's like a dozen or something like that cultists in this room, and just two of them, right? So I hadn't particularly planned this encounter. This was not what I was thinking things were going to be like. Yeah, it happens, right? So you have the cult leader up at the front. You have all the cultists around, right, guarding them, dragging them toward the altar where they're going to be sacrificed. And they figure, okay, well, what can we do? There's no way we can possibly win this fight. So they do try to fight them off a little bit, but it's clear this is not going to go in their favor. At which point, I just kind of gently reminded them that they had made some friends recently. Right? So they just kind of yell, "Help, help!" And the Dread Vault of Chaos is close enough to the temple, I decide, right, that the orcs that are their friends, right, catch wind of this and show up not just with their two orc friends, but rather a significant number of orc friends show up, right, come into the temple, and this huge fight erupts, right? That then kind of gives the PCs the upper hand. Now, the cult leader realizes this, and once he sees things are not going his way, I mean, he does. Like, if you're the leader of an evil cult, what are you going to do? You run, right? So he goes out the back door and dashes, right? So Isaac, the cold-blooded killer, my 12-year-old, decides, oh no, no, this is not happening, right? So he runs out after him, right? Now, and then he very quickly learns that, according to the rules of D&D, because of the way that the action economy works, right, if the person you're pursuing is just trying to dash away from you and their speed is the same as yours, and you're trying to run after them and also attack them, they're going to outrun you pretty quickly, and you're not going to be able to get to like take them out. Right? My favorite moment, probably of the entire campaign, happens right then. When Isaac, the cold-blooded killer, the alleged murderer of the king, who wasn't actually murdered, a lawful good wizard, decides that, well, I can't possibly let this evil cult leader get away. Forest fire. That's the solution. So he starts a forest fire. Yeah, yeah, fantastic. End of session. Right? So, end of session. Forest fire is starting, and this evil cult leader is trying to run away. And at this point, Isaac the cold-blooded killer is satisfied. He doesn't need to actually see the body, right? So, oh, there's no way, right? They outran a forest fire. We'll see. We'll see in the future. Anyway, so how things in Willowell come to an end then, kind of the denouement of this particular arc of their story is that they come back to the village after this. The village has noticed that there is a forest fire going on that seems to be raging not too far away. And so they're all starting to pack their bags. They're like, we're not possibly going to make it through this, right? We built out of like, the woods that we're surrounded by. All of our housing is going to burn, right? So we need to leave. Right, so everybody's packing up, and so Isaac the Cold-Blooded Killer and Balasar say, "Well, okay, we'll help deal with this fire," um, which obviously the evil cult must have started. I love that. So the villagers are convinced the evil cult is who started the fire. It was not. It was not. So, so it was okay. We'll go fight the forest fire for you. Of course, at this point, things are so far out of control. There's no way a level 2 wizard and a level 2 sorcerer can contain right the forest fire. But they go and they try. It's one of those cases where, as the DM, sometimes you say, "Well, you can try," and they manage to like build some ice walls here and there and contain just little pieces of it, but it just burns around them. Right? Which that was actually kind of a fun encounter to run. Right, so I had my battle map out, some trees around, that kind of thing, right? And then I just kind of marked on it. I have a dry erase battle map that I use, right? And then I just kind of drew right here. This is the line where the fire is, right? And then whatever you're going to do to try to fight it, right? You can try to block it. And they would do things like, oh, have an ice wall spell or something like that. I'm going to try to block it up here, here, that kind of thing. And then the fire would move around it and would surround them and that kind of thing. So we ended up with Isaac the Cold-Blooded Killer at one point being completely surrounded by fire. Uh, Not a great situation. No, he did manage to get out of it, just kind of dashing through the fire before it got so far that he wouldn't have been able to make it. Would have had to take significant fire damage potentially. And so they make it back to the village. It's obvious that they're not going to be able to stop the forest fire that they started. I'm sure there's some analogy for life here. Sometimes you start things that you can't actually take back. But so that's what ends up happening. They join up with the rest of the village, help them pack up, and protect them on their way right to a neighboring city. Uh, and that is how the village of Willowell met its end, with the people becoming refugees, having to travel to the nearby city of Beach Wharf, which was a couple days' travel away, but there was enough swampland there that I figured that the fire wouldn't follow that entire way. It would, in fact, hit fire breaks before it got to that place. So I think next time when I share an update, I'll talk about what they've done in Beech Wharf so far. Beech Wharf is still where they are. They haven't done a whole lot there yet. I think we've only had like maybe two or three sessions in Beech Wharf so far. Right, so I'll let you know what's going on there. Certainly, the at this point, the evil cult has been left behind. It's basically out of power, and so has been their orc friends. We don't really actually know what happened to them. Yeah, that's something that might be interesting at some point. Right. Another thing that I did, right, so I think I mentioned before, I used the Worlds Without Number faction turn. So that's something that I decided. Now, the way that that system is designed, uh, well, you have the GM or the DM, right, plays like a little mini game in between sessions, and the way that it's set up, they say you want to do this basically once every in-game month. I decided to make it a little bit more frequent. So I just do it kind of in between each session. So these factions are doing things. So at this point, I have the main factions here. You have because I had to back up a bit because like the little factions, they're really not around anymore, right? So we have the major factions that I'm dealing with now. One in Beech Wharf, there's an academy of mage types, right? So they are doing things. They're trying to spread their influence, establish new academies elsewhere throughout the kingdom. We also have the kingdom itself, right? So I figured, well, we have here the prince and the alleged murderer of the king who is not dead, right? So the kingdom itself is probably going to be interested in these people and trying to find them at some point, right? So that's a new faction that exists. The Order of Light exists, and then also in Beech Wharf, more locally, we have. I decided that Beech Wharf, as it's set up, I'll talk more about this later. That you basically have kind of two main powers, right? One is the city guards, which is run by the captain of the guard, and the other it would be this magic academy. So they're kind of the two main factions in that city that are going to be doing things and interacting with each other, also with the their characters, obviously, and have some interactions also with kind of the wider world. And like you know, the Order of Light is a significant faction that is not just local; it's throughout the entire kingdom, and then the kingdom itself also trying to exert influence. Right. So I decided, and this is kind of the way the minigame would end up playing out if you play it as written, and I decided to do it that way, is that the kingdom here, while it exists, it doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of influence everywhere just yet, right? So it is trying to establish a stronger influence throughout the area that technically owes fealty or whatever to the king, right? So they're kind of in that process. The Order of Light is kind of trying to establish missions and that kind of thing, right? Uh, so we have all of these things kind of interacting with each other in between sessions, which is kind of fun. So I would say that like if you are uh, GMing or DMing a fantasy-based game, I highly recommend looking up Worlds Without Number and looking specifically at the faction section, the faction turn, that concept. It's a cool thing that kind of keeps the background moving in ways that make the world a bit more alive. And then you can figure out, well, how does this actually interact with the player characters? And actually, some people you don't have to deal with all that. That's fine. Right? But I think it's kind of fun to play this little mini game in between sessions myself. All right, so I think I'll call it there. We'll talk more about Beech Wharf in my next update, whenever that happens to be. Probably get you totally caught up to speed in terms of where we are now, and then you'll have to wait till I actually have a session with my kids. Um, but I told them that I made the previous video, and they were very enthusiastic about that. So I'm very excited to share another one as I did here today. And there's some debate. One of my kids said that they wanted us to actually record a live session. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Um, Mostly because my recording setup is not particularly good. I'm not going to put a lot of effort into editing that kind of thing. So you're going to like see the raw footage of what it's like, which might actually be useful if you're thinking about doing something like playing Dungeons and Dragons with your kids. Right. So what does it actually look like? That might be something I'd think about. Right. So that is something that might possibly be in the works. We'll see. Okay. All right. Well, this is then Profi signing off.